All right. Hooray.
Hello.
Cool. Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Today we're talking to Tim and Angelos, and you folks are from the Web Tools team?
That's right.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm gonna run through my community links for this week, and then we'll just jump right over to all the fun stuff you have to show off. So let me share my desktop here. And I don't have a huge amount of links for today, but they're cool ones. So first of all, there's an update for Azure App Configuration. So Azure App Configuration is a kind of relatively new thing. It's kind of a configuration server sort of idea where you can centralize your application configuration. So that works especially if you're sharing configuration among like different microservices or working with deployment pipelines, stuff like that. So here I'm including this in the show links for this week too, and I'll post all these at the end after I go through them. So, but the update here is that the initial design for this was based on a timer base. So it was updating every 30 seconds by default. And the new setup is set up to based on activity-based refresh. And then the other thing in here is that you can actually include in your application in your web host configuration that you can set your ping for your refresh interval. So thought that was neat. I actually haven't used this. I've kind of generally seen that it was out there, but I haven't put it to use. So I'm interested if folks are watching, any comments on that, how it's working for you. All right, another cool new release from the Learn group. So this is an actual like interactive tutorial, and so this is building ASP.NET Core web app with identity framework. So this is a nice thing where you go through, you work with the Cloud Shell, and it configures resources for you and everything. So you can just write in your browser, you can work through and build stuff. So like as I go through and configure things here, it's activating Sandbox and building stuff out, and I'm getting points too, which is neat. And yeah, and so you go through and it includes things like customizing the UI and stuff like that. So pretty cool. Love to see how they're cranking those things out.
It's always nice to gamify development too.
Exactly. Give me those points. This is nice from Odd here. He's just reminding you that you can clean up your ASP.NET Core startup. I notice this, my ASP.NET Core startups keep growing over time, and then the team keeps simplifying the startup, and then I keep adding stuff in and it keeps growing again. So a nice pattern here, and Scott Allen has written some posts on this sort of thing generally in the past too, but moving things into extension methods. So instead of having just tons and tons of code, you can actually move stuff into an extension method, and then your startup gets a lot simpler because you can just say, configure this, add this, do this. So good reminder there.
I like that the examples even using the Swagger stuff that we're going to be talking about later too.
Oh, cool. Yep. All right, Nate McMaster here. He's published a .NET Global tool for Let's Encrypt. So Let's Encrypt it provides you free HTTPS certificates. One thing that is required with that though is you have to run and you have to manually renew them and that kind of stuff. So this is nice. This is actually what he's got set up here. You can include here it's middleware that says add Let's Encrypt. So I thought I had also seen that there's a global tool for this, or I'm incorrect here. This is a ASP.NET Core integration. So this is actually doing this in your middleware and stuff. So that's pretty cool. Excited to see that come out and yeah, simplifying that process. All right, Eric here posting about Razor components in Blazor. So Razor components are a way where you can kind of build self-contained chunk of UI. And just a reminder that you can use this inside of Blazor applications. So here he walks through creating a Razor component and showing how to use that with parameters. And yeah, just kind of a quick walkthrough there.
I think we added support for static content in those libraries in 16.2 for VS as well.
Oh, cool.
You can have static content in your libraries that you can serve
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I remember that was in the release post, but there was a ton of stuff in there. So yeah, yeah, very cool. Okay, and I will be publishing these will go in the YouTube notes and I'll publish them in the chats and everything. And that is it for me. So I'm going to pop back. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll go back over to you folks.
All right.
All right. So before we dive in too much, you folks are on the Web Tools team. Can you what sort of stuff is this Web Tools for? Like all of Visual Studio? Is this how?
Well, I'm a PM for .NET, so I mainly focus on .NET projects and project support and tooling in Visual Studio, mainly on Windows. But a lot of the stuff that we use for .NET is available for other stacks as well. But what we show here today, and primarily what I'm interested in, is .NET and Visual Studio on Windows. But the team I work with also owns other features in Visual Studio, like publishing. So later on, maybe we can talk a bit about publishing to Azure, provisioning, that kind of stuff. Also work on the project system support. So if your project is dealing with user secrets, so tooling around that. So all sorts of tooling specifically for web projects, ASP.NET, Azure Functions, that kind of stuff in Visual Studio on Windows.
Great. I love the user secrets, by the way. That's been a huge game changer just for how I develop, to not have to worry about like, oops, did I push a key out to GitHub or something?
Reduces anxiety. We like that.
Yes, yes.
And I'm on the other side of the room, literally, from his part of the team, more on the web editors side of things, the HTML editor, the CSS editor, browser link, something that our team owns also, and we picked up the HTTP REPL tool that we'll be talking about today. So yeah.
Cool, cool. All right. So what do you have to show off today then?
Intro. Do you want to intro? All right.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the idea was born out of the need to quickly explore and learn and test your APIs. And as projects get bigger and bigger and microservices gain traction, we've seen people that are breaking up their application to smaller chunks. And it's much more likely to now have to explore a chunk of the application that you didn't necessarily write. So it's not necessarily for a team, it's for all kinds of scenarios, whether you're experimenting with an API from a vendor, an internal microservice from another team member, maybe you're looking at different offerings and you want to compare them. The idea is you want to explore or test APIs. And typically, whenever you work with a web project, specifically with .NET, we just assume you wanted a web browser, and we just let you write up your code and fire up a web browser. But as we started getting popularity with our web API projects and that kind of stuff, we realized that opening up a browser is not that useful. So we thought to ourselves, well, what's handy here? What's useful? What's helpful? And what we realized is that people wanted to focus on the exploration and the learning, and they didn't want to focus too much on getting the syntax right or getting the authentication right or things like that. So the suggestion was born, well, there's this idea of a loop. Of you do something, you check it, you do something more, you check it, you do something more. And there's different technology stacks that really capitalize on that, like Python with REPL was very popular. And we're thinking, well, what if we applied that kind of concept on a command line tool that lets you explore an API, kind of like we'd explore a folder with files. So it's something that you don't have to worry too much about getting the commands right. It's everything that you're familiar with. You don't have to worry about remembering what you did before. You just keep going and you keep exploring and you keep learning. It's an idea, it's a prototype, it's a first release. We're hoping that the community will give us lots of ideas as to how they want to extend it, how they want to use it, what kind of integration they want to see next. We'll talk about our plans, but the main focus is to get feedback from the community. What do you think we can do more with this tool?
Cool. Okay.
I think we should go with a demo, Tim, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me switch over to my machine here. So basically, I've got a web API solution running here. This was just the the default scaffolded template that was in the latest preview of Visual Studio for a web API. I added a few little things to it and added the swashbuckle to generate the Swagger definition. But otherwise, it's basically just the default template there. And then I've got this is a late-breaking build of the HTTP REPL tool that I built about 15 minutes ago before walking over here. So it's not the one that's on NuGet at the moment, but it's basically the same thing. And so basically I'll just walk through connecting to it and seeing what happens there. So connecting to it is pretty simple as far as just typing in the base address that you want to connect to. The tool will then go out and find the Swagger file based on convention. So it has a set of paths that it uses. It looks up and tries to find where you have the Swagger file in your project. You can see it. Oh, there's Scott. You can see it managed to find it, and it set the base address there. So now the cool thing is we'll do an ls, and kind of like if you're doing, checking what's in your directory, it shows we got a couple different endpoints here, a random endpoint, which is the one that I added, and a weather forecast endpoint that was part of the default template. And so then, just like browsing directory structure, you can go ahead and cd into it. You can see it's giving the types of HTTP commands that you can issue against the endpoint, so it'll accept either a get or a post. And to do that, you just literally type get, and that's the response from the API endpoint there. Formatted the JSON, did some interesting colorization on it with the purple and the green, but colorizes it to make it a little easier to read. And it's that simple to go ahead and just quickly test one of your endpoints on there. There's a couple things that didn't show up on that demo quite well, and that's we do have like auto completion. So if you type CD and you can't remember exactly what it is, you can hit tab and it's going to auto complete through the options that you have, since it knows what the endpoints are that are there. Another thing on here is, so as you can see, the weather forecast one takes a post. So we can issue a post command, and what that's going to do is it actually opens up my default editor, which I have set as Visual Studio Code here, and gives me kind of a template of what that API expects you to be posting to it as part of the body. And it kind of fills in some default values there. And you can go ahead and change it. Celsius 40, I think that's pretty hot, so I'm going to say that's too hot. And save it, close it, and it goes ahead and posts it back to the server, and I have the server set to just respond with the same object back that also has the temperature in Fahrenheit with the conversion. So see, I did do my Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion correctly there. That was hot.
Right. I love that. That's really handy, because otherwise going through and manually creating that JSON and all that is just busy work, right?
Right, exactly. So to the extent that the Swagger definition file has the schema information in it for what it expects, the tool will try to respect that and generate some sample data or example stuff for you to use for that. You can also do it inline, or you can pass it a file if you've got what you want it to post in a file. There's some other options on the post command to do it that way too, but that's kind of the quick and dirty way of doing the post there. Let's see, what else did I want to show on that?
Sorry, I'm late. Did you talk about how the Swagger got found? Like the heuristics about that stuff that we talked about?
Yeah, just a little bit. Basically, we've got some predefined lookups for what it's going to where it's going to try to look to find that Swagger file based on the route that you pass in when you do that connect command. So we have a just kind of default couple of settings in there that we look for it, but you can also change that. There's a preference in the tool, so you can change it if you're constantly having to tell it to look somewhere else for it because your particular project has decided to store it somewhere else. You can change the setting on the tool so you're not having to type that every time, and it'll find it where you have it. We also just recently, I think just yesterday, the NuGet package went live with the change in it. We changed some things with the way it works so that we're now respecting the base address that is specified in the OpenAPI 3 Swagger definition. So if the Swagger definition actually specifies the address, we go ahead and use that. Scott actually had a scenario where it was in there and the tool wasn't respecting it. And so we switched some things around so that the new connect command handles that situation properly. It'll find the Swagger file and then set the base address based on that. Let's see. What else did I want to show here?
We can talk about authentication and headers and things like that.
Yeah. So.
Oh yeah.
That's a pretty common request that we're starting to get, and I know authentication is going to be a high priority for after the first release. But for right now, there is somewhat of a workaround for some of the common scenarios. The most common thing that we saw was that people wanted to be able to use bearer tokens, and there's no like built-in way right now to say, use this token. But what you can do is just issue a set header command, and if I can remember what it is, authentication.
You should be able to tab and autocomplete on the
yeah,
headers,
that's right. I think you can. Yep, you can tab through, and we'll get there eventually. Authorization, sure, we'll go with that. And then bearer, and then whatever your token is, you can put that there. That sets the header so that now any commands that you issue from that point forward, it's going to pass that authorization header with the command. We can see that working if I'm going to do echo on, so that's going to have it echo back out to the screen what commands what HTTP commands it's sending out. So if I do the get now, and then you look, this is the whole HTTP request that went out. You can see it got the authorization header in there, and then the response. And so that's going to stay there for as long as the tool is running till you exit it. That header will be there, so you can continue using that same bearer token against all your API endpoints in there.
And it's showing up automatically. Like you've said it once, it's persistent, it's session persistent.
Correct.
So because you have echo on, it's showing up every time. If you didn't turn echo on, you'd really never know, right?
Right. If you turn echo back off, and then you don't actually see it, you're just seeing the response if you don't have echo on. So you don't know what it's doing. It's not actually sending it, or not actually showing it.
At this point, I've enjoyed talking with you about this and working on this before you've shown it. And I'm curious, you're really getting to the point where it's just fit and finish now. Like it works great. Have you thought about how it ought to look? Like, should it feel like a prompt? I know you added the tilde after you want it to feel like a shell of sorts, because it is a shell, but like from a syntax coloring perspective and what the prompt should look like just kind of like if you're going to live here, if someone's going to spend their life in this thing, what kind of little like quality of life improvements would you add?
That's a good question, and we'd like to hear from the community on that, and you, Scott. But I don't know if you've had any. I guess let me switch back to so they can see us talking. Andros, I don't know if you've gotten any feedback on those pieces of it.
I don't have any feedback from the community yet, but I think one of the promises here is that it stays out of your way. The tool itself stays out of your way. So I would take a pass at making sure that elements that shouldn't stand out are not standing out in terms of color schemes. Maybe de-emphasize some things and emphasize others. And maybe add some ways that people can know that their headers have been updated and they have changed and things like that. So being aware of the context and then de-emphasizing things that are noisy and you don't really need. Because the main point here is reusing things you already know. There should be no higher bar of entry in terms of learning commands or anything like that. So it's simple and not noisy. I think it's met the goal. I think the main thing is going to be integrating with your tools and your tool chain as well.
Which we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I guess the only other thing that I really wanted to show with this was that you don't have to do this against a local endpoint. If there's a public endpoint that you want to explore, you can kind of dig into it using this tool. So I'm going to pull up another. This is actually, go back on there. Go back to me. So this is actually the same tool, the released version so far, but running in Ubuntu on WSL2. So get a little inception thing going on here, but I'm going to, let's see, let me go ahead and connect to an endpoint that I was using for testing. So this is just a site that the people who run the Swagger stuff and keep up the spec have up there. We were able to find the Swagger definition just like normal. You can run the ls command and kind of start exploring. You can see they've got some stuff with pets. Go in there.
So like just to your point about fit and finish, like as you're watching the customers and the folks that are watching right now, think about what you'd want this to look like. Is that the way you want it to look? Is that is that representative of what you would think this feels like? Or would it be like little things? Make the verbs all caps, or make them in color, or what would make you happy to spend all your days in this thing?
Yeah, you can see that it was, it was clearly set up to mimic the normal structure, showing the dot, that kind of thing. But in terms of the things you're talking about, what should be called out and what should be de-emphasized when you're seeing the output from these commands.
Well, and so just as an interesting point, if I may derail you a bit, talk about the dot, meaning current directory for old people, and what put and post mean in that context. I read that to mean that this endpoint as it is above will take a post or a put. So /pet, you can post a pet or put a pet, and that's what dot means there.
That's correct. Yeah, that's
that
saying
correct?
Where you are right now, post and put are your two options for that. And then there's other things inside of it, just kind of like extra directories or files in it, in that kind of listing that you can also go to. But yeah, the dot means for this particular endpoint, post and put are the two valid commands for it.
Right. Now, folks in the comments here on Twitch definitely think color is like not just a improvement but a requirement. It's also worth pointing out, of course, that Tim is in a regular console host here rather than Windows Terminal, but since this is a console application, it would work just fine with Windows Terminal. So much so that if you wanted to, you could actually add the HTTP REPL for your whatever project you're working on as a tab in Windows Terminal. And have that be a
that's
standard
cool.
tab.
Yeah.
I'll actually do a blog post on that tonight.
Nice. I think that was.
What about autocomplete? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, there's a question about doing things like displaying timing statistics for API calls. Is it possible to get kind of more
micro benchmarking automatically within it? Just you said echo on. How about timing on? And then you start giving me milliseconds.
It's a great idea.
It's a possibility. Yeah.
Who's writing all these good ideas down?
I am.
He's the PM.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I mean, that feels a little bit like the performance tips that we have when you're debugging in Visual Studio, right? It's great. You step over, you get a little measurement. Yeah. You hit your API, you get a little measurement. I like it.
All right. So I'll assume you're writing that down. So I love that idea. Color, timing. I like. What about autocomplete? If you type, like, if I wanted to put something, I type put. Can I type P and hit tab?
Yep.
Nice. Oh.
It'll autocomplete through the things that it knows about, which, if the commands that are available